The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
Reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. At that time Jesus exclaimed, I give praise to you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, for although you have hidden these things from the wise and the learned, you have revealed them to little ones. Yes, Father, such has been your gracious will. All things have been handed over to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son wishes to reveal him. Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart, and you will find rest for yourselves. For my yoke is easy and my burden light. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
In the first reading this morning, we hear a description of a vision that the prophet Zechariah had. It had to do with God coming to his people in a humble way. Humble. One would have expected God to come to his people on a large horse with an army, lots of regalia and music playing. But that's not his vision. That the Lord is coming, in fact, riding on a donkey. Donkey was the animal of poor people. That's how they carried things, donkeys. But that's what the Lord is riding, coming to his people. Zechariah says that he will eliminate all war from the people, all conflict, and that he will proclaim peace to the nations. It is an image that we think of when we think of what we now call Palm Sunday, when Jesus entered his city of Jerusalem, riding on a donkey, just like in the vision of Zechariah. He comes in peace. He comes in humility. He doesn't come to oppress, but comes to save. That image is continued in the gospel. Jesus is saying, I give praise to you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, for although you have hidden these things, you have revealed them to little ones. Little ones, not the powerful, not the mighty, but little ones. The Greek word that we translate as little ones is actually nepios. Nepios is a child who is too young to speak. It means unable to speak. So the image that Jesus is using not only of a child, but a little child. They haven't even learned to talk yet. And that's how the people are in relationship to God. God comes to reach out to them. It's a metaphor. Jesus uses that little child image, the nepios, for the people. They're the children of God. He will sometimes call them my children. He is inviting the people to come in peace and rest. The people at the time were poor. They were oppressed not only by the Romans, but by their own government. The taxes were really high. If you were a farmer and raised crops, the soldiers would come and maybe take half or more than you grew. So you're left with very little. The taxes were high. The religious leadership was severe. They demanded perfect following of the law, or you would be punished. 613 tenets of the law you're required to follow in order to be a good person. But Jesus is inviting them to come away from that. Come away from all that pressure and pain and oppression and come to me. All you who are labor and are burdened, I will give you rest. Rest from all of that. Rest from the oppression. Rest from the taxes. Rest from being victimized. Come to me and I will give you rest. It's a time out. Those would have been amazing words to the crowd listening to Jesus, to think that they could come to him and get away from all of that pressure. And then Jesus says to them, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and humble of heart. It's that humble God we heard in the first reading, riding on a donkey. Jesus reflects the Father, says, I know the Father, and the Father knows me. If you want to see the Father, see me. And what you see is a very humble man, a very humble teacher, coming to save his people. The yoke that he speaks about is what they would put around the neck of an ox and then attach ropes to it, and the ox would pull a wagon or pull the plow. But ox didn't learn to do that on their own. You just left an ox on their own with a yoke on it tied to a wagon, the ox would wander all over the place. You certainly wouldn't be able to plow your fields. You'd be down at the neighbors making a mess. So he had to teach the ox how to walk in a straight line. When they had a young ox, little ox that hadn't done anything yet, they're still young, this yoke that Jesus is talking about has a second yoke attached to it, but it's a little yoke, and it's down lower. And they would attach that to the little ox. So the big ox has the big yoke on, attached to it this little yoke, attached to the slow young ox. And then the older ox would begin to walk, and it would teach the young ox how to walk in a straight line, how to do the things the ox needed to do in order to pull a wagon, in order to plow the fields. The little ox would walk along and learn how to walk in a straight line. But what Jesus is saying, that the big ox is carrying the weight of the yoke. The little ox has almost no weight. It's being guided. And so Jesus is using that image for discipleship. Jesus is carrying most of the weight of discipleship. And we're connected to him, and he's teaching us, but he carries most of the weight. For he is meek and humble of heart. People would find that very strange, of God being humble. It would have been a foreign concept to them. Because as we hear in the Old Testament scriptures, God is portrayed as this violent, angry, threatening, controlling deity. Very much like the pagan gods. That's how they were. Pagans were scared to death of their gods. You couldn't trust them. They'd hurt you, maybe even kill you. And so the Jewish people in those early days had picked up on that. They looked at themselves and said, we're angry, we're violent. God must be like that. And so they project their violence onto God. But Jesus comes and starts talking about the Father. And said, oh, the Father's not like that. That's wrong. That was a wrong image in the Old Testament scriptures. It wasn't true. Inspired truths were in the scriptures, but not that view of God. That was wrong. Because God loves you. God cares for you like a father. It's not a scary deity throwing lightning bolts and throwing rocks around, having a fit. God's not like that. God's loving and meek and humble. And so it's that reality that Jesus reflects. He says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light. You will not be oppressed by God. God is here to help you and save you and make life easier for you. As Christians, we're called to reflect that reality of God. We can sometimes find ourselves putting heavy burdens on people. Heavy burdens. We think we do it for all the best reasons. We have high standards. Expect you to meet them. Happens with children. Parents have high standards. You're going to have the cleanest room in the neighborhood. You're going to get straight A's in school, and you're going to be the star football player. They put these expectations of the children so high that often the children can't succeed. They keep failing. And so you find the children, they're sad and they're hopeless sometimes because they can't meet that 100% goal that the parent has set for them. But that's true of adults. People married do the same thing to each other sometimes. You might have a spouse that doesn't know how to fill the dishwasher. You may have a spouse that really doesn't know how to drive. They've got to be told what to do at every turn. You may not know how to take out the garbage. You may not know how to do laundry or cook. But the expectation is, yes, you will. You're going to make it. We're striving for that 100% goal. And people can't. People can't. Perfection is not within us. We're imperfect people. But we're called to reflect this humility of God. And so what we can do is lower the standards. Now, this isn't talking about health and safety issues. Those need to be high. People keep people safe. But in terms of lifestyle, in goals in life, in how we live, we don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be 100%. A child should not be so stressed out at school doing something they can't do. They can't get those grades that you insist they will. Lower the standard. Be student, good student, responsible, happier. We're not striving for perfection. Same thing with your spouse. Same thing with a friend, the neighbor you meet. Not to have those high standards. You have got to be this way. Now, I may not be perfect, but by golly, you are, and you're going to make it. And so we're called to meditate upon how can we reflect this meekness and humility of Jesus. Because that's how God is, and that's how we're called to be like God, as God's people. Not to be like the Jewish leadership at the time, or the Romans, who were oppressing the people, having high standards, demanding all kinds of stuff from them. But to be like Jesus, welcoming people to be at rest, to relax in your presence, to be the best they can, but not to feel like you're pushing for perfection. Because they're never going to make it, and they keep failing over and over again. And so we're called to be like Jesus, be meek and mild, be humble. And in that way, we reflect the reality of Jesus towards us each day.